Hello, hello. Welcome to season 5 of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what's important to them. I see way too many business people letting their businesses or their jobs run their lives versus them figuring out with real clarity about what they want their lives to look like and having their job or their business be the conduit to have that life that they absolutely love. I want to thank you so much for listening in to season 5. This season is filled with motivation, inspiration, leadership, and wisdom from some super interesting guests, and myself included. My hope is through our shared experiences, you will see a bit of yourself and move further into leading your own lit up life. If you're enjoying this podcast, please feel free to share with others and leave a rating, and a comment or two would be awesome too. Let's get going. Thanks again for being a part of our community.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Lit Up Life with Debbie Heiser. I say this every time, but I'm super excited to have Alicia with us today. And I want to tell you a little bit about Alicia and why I felt compelled to ask her to be a part of the podcast. Alicia and I met each other back in 2020 at a mastermind with our business coach. And it was an experience unlike any that I've ever experienced even since then. And just so cool out in the middle of the desert. And of course it was cold and snowed. We were all thinking it'd be warm, which I thought was kind of funny. But we walked into a room with like 19 other women that we didn't know. And by the time we left that room 3 days later, we all had created these connections where we knew we were going to support each other and be there for each other. And then COVID hit, so we didn't get to get back together in person. We were virtual the rest of the year. But what really intrigues me about you, Alicia, is like this journey that I've even seen you go on, where some awarenesses that have come up for you that are very introspective. But yet it's this combination of the right brain and the left brain because like you're also very left brained in how you think, but then the right brain comes in and it's just like this interweaving that happens. And there are so many cool things that you're doing in your work and outside of work and raising teenagers and doing all of the things that you're doing that I just think I look at you and I see someone that's leading a very grounded, lit up life. You know, sometimes when I talk about being lit up, people are like, right, like it's all this. And what I see in you is this well-rounded, and very grounded in where you're at. So that's why I'm so excited to talk to you today and have you on this episode. And I'm going to ask Alicia to introduce herself because, as many of you know that have listened for a while, I think people do a much better job of introducing themselves. So Alicia, take it away. Introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks so much, Debbie. And I love that introduction. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. So right now I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Environment in the Americas for the global consulting firm GHD. So GHD began to make its mark in the Americas only 10 years ago through acquisition, but has a deep 100-year history in Australia. So I've been in consulting in the AEC, which is architecture, engineering, and construction space for over 20 years, with the last 3 being at GHD. So as you said, I have 2 teenagers, I'm happily married, and let's begin our conversation.
Okay, I want to go back because when you talk about environment, there's a lot of different connotations that can come from that. Like, what exactly is that in that space that you're in, and what got you into this space?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think when I say environment and I say the environment market, that's a really big market. So it's a great question. What that means is, traditionally, it's been a lot of cleanup. So you may have heard of like EPA designated Superfund sites, right? Companies polluting the earth, and then we come in and clean it up and bring it to the level that's acceptable for repurposing, or dealing with emergency response spills, derailments, things like that. So any kind of contamination. So now, though, what's interesting about this space is that we're starting to see a shift through ESG, which you may have heard, environment, social governance. And
Okay.
that is a real buzzword right now in the industry, because a lot of times you've heard companies share their sustainability reports, right? And those are things that companies have had to do for a really long time to show that they have sustainable business practices. And over the years, that's started to become a little bit more concrete in how those are measured. And that's why right now in the environmental consulting space, we're starting to come over to the black side of the balance sheet, if you will. So it's not just something that companies have to do to respond or react to a situation. It's also a way of how to get in front, how to mitigate, and how to show that, carbon credits, things like that, to bring things forward. So we focus on climate change and topics that are much, much broader than they may have been in the past.
Okay. And that's cool. And so like, because you went to college, and so when you graduated, was it like, oh, I'm going to go into the environmental field, or so tell us a little bit about how that morphed, because you're also in a field that's not heavily populated by women.
You are correct.
Right? It's becoming more, but
yeah. I mean, it's a journey for sure on that track. And I think that what's interesting is my first degree is in fine arts. When I was in college, I did a study abroad to study fine arts in Warsaw, Poland, right? Then I started to get into the workforce. I needed to find a job. I wasn't going to be able to make my living as an artist at that point. So I found a job through a recruiter, got into a different kind of consulting, worked in some administrative roles, started to work my way into really the corporate space, and then ended up finding a job because I was ready to shift into a different space. Through another recruiter, found myself in the AEC, as I mentioned, consulting space over 20 years ago. I didn't even know this was a job when I was in college. About several years after I graduated with my first degree, I decided to go back to school and get another degree in English and professional and technical writing. I felt that would align more with who I was and give me more opportunities, and it really did. So I began doing proposal management, so responding to proposals to get new business, so very business development, and then evolved into sales strategy and communications, and realized I had a real knack for it because I was coaching teams on how to go to market with what they were wanting to deliver to our clients. So it's been kind of an interesting space because I am very right-brained, as you mentioned, in a very left-brain space, but I'm also very grounded and analytical. So I find that is definitely one of my superpowers.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And I know another superpower of yours, well, there's many.
There are.
And when you talk about and we were talking about being grounded, I know yoga has been a big piece of that. Tell us a little bit about what got you into yoga, why you feel it's important, and some of the lessons. Because I remember being, part of our little mini group that we would meet once a month, and hearing the journey you were going on with yoga and some learnings you had about that, if you don't mind sharing that, and how important that is for you to be grounded.
Yeah, when I began practicing, I had no idea the impact it would have, as that is pretty common. And probably a few years into my practice, I was in a shavasana, which is the final resting pose in a class. And
my favorite pose, by the way.
It's a great favorite pose. What's interesting about that, I was in that pose and I just had a moment of clarity that dropped into my brain that said I needed to be a yoga teacher. And so I was working full time. I was finishing my second degree that I mentioned, and I decided to embark in yoga teacher training. And so I finished my yoga teacher training around the same time I finished my second degree, right before I gave birth to my daughter. So it was a lot going on. I was a very, very busy person at that time, probably by design. And I just have found that no matter what life has dealt me or whatever changes and fluctuations have come my way, that yoga has been the constant, because it is so flexible, there's no pun there actually, in how you can respond to it, whether it's through meditation, whether it's from lying in shavasana, to a very active physical practice, because yoga is much more than the asana or the physical practice. And I think that has served me as a guide throughout my life. And I feel, since I stopped teaching yoga in 2020, but those practices and those philosophies are so integrated into how I show up that, to your point, I do think that is what differentiates me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alicia, tell me, because I know, like, I'm hitting on some of your passions
Mm-hmm.
because, this is about leading a lit up life. And one of them is the work that you do, and you're passionate about that and love it as far as like the industry itself,
Mm-hmm.
yoga, which helps keep you grounded. And I know there's another kind of passionate section there that I think falls into your personal life and your professional life, because we
Yes.
are mentoring our children, right? And so I know mentoring and helping to coach up other people is really important to you. Tell me, like, can you think back to like a pivotal moment when you decided that was a route you wanted to go, that you wanted to help other people become better leaders or become leaders, period?
Oh, that's a really great question. I don't know if I have a pivotal moment or if it was a gradual build. It does
Yeah.
feel more gradual build, because I think, especially in hindsight, I see what so many people have done for me by not only paving the way to make my way as a female leader in a very white male dominated space.
Yeah.
And that's evolving, as you mentioned. But also, I think that they have shown me what leadership can look like for people who don't fit into that very technical space, right? Historically,
Yeah.
very technical space. So I think it was those who have supported me along the way have really shown me how to do that for others. So it really is kind of a pay it forward mindset,
Yeah.
because the benefits are tremendous. And, working with young professionals is definitely one of the areas that lights me up, because it also allows me to grow, right? When I'm mentoring people or coaching people, whether it's formal or informal, I get as much out of it as they get. I'm not only imparting my experience and what I've, my wisdom, if you will, as more of an elder in the organization,
Yeah.
but I'm also getting a perspective that I would never have access to unless I created that space.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. And it makes me think about, I don't know why this comes up, but well, two things, because I think we could geek out about a conversation here about this. I remember early on in my executive career at Sprint, which is no longer around, but a gentleman that was a mentor of mine, Mike Tracy, there were 3 of us women in an executive group of about 15. And I got up to get coffee, and I looked at the 2 gentlemen next to me and said, "Hey, do you want any coffee?" And after the meeting, he looked at me and he said, "Never do that again." Now, you have to understand this was back in the early 90s, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm confused, right? Like, I'm just being my authentic self. I would do that no matter who was there." And he said, "The minute you did that, those men started to see you as their admin."
Yes.
Now,
The
today
optics.
that would like already, like I was even getting the hair on the back of my neck, right? But it's interesting to me to see how that's evolved. And being in corporate for so long, I was in my masculine so much that now that I'm not in corporate, trying to incorporate this flow between like action and receiving has been an interesting journey. And so do you have a moment or like something like that? Because you kind of grinned when I was saying that you looked at and thought, wow, I want to mentor a little differently. And let me give a little context here. There's a book, now I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called Lean Out. And this woman used to work for the woman that did Lean In.
Oh,
And it's the opposite, where what she's saying is women, particularly in corporate, we have to quit fighting with each other and quit, like, she was talking about how as women, we tend to be more competitive with each other than men are, and not as supportive. And that the message keeps coming that we have to be more like the men in
right.
the organization,
Mm-hmm.
versus why aren't we mentoring people to say, bring the feminine into it to balance it out? And so I'm interested to know, A, what you think about that concept, and and let's have a little conversation about like how you're mentoring and how you're seeing that work for or against some of maybe women that you're mentoring. I know you mentor both, but
Yeah, it's a really important thing to consider. I think that, I did read Lean In, right?
oh,
And I
you did.
think at the time it was really important read. And I think there was a lot of masculine around that as well. And I know that I definitely embodied that in some spaces. And I also know there is a moment that I remember bringing my very feminine self into a meeting that was predominantly male. It was in Houston, Texas. I was with another colleague who was another leader, also female. And I went into that meeting I was totally suited up, which I never do anymore, wearing heels, which I never do anymore because it doesn't align with who I am. It's uncomfortable and I'm not able to really be my full self when I'm uncomfortable. But I remember feeling that that was important to take up as much space as I possibly could with my female to have some presence. It's almost like I just, I wanted to get taller. I'm already tall. I needed to get taller to be able to feel seen, which it's like, it's almost not disappointing, but it's almost like, it is pivotal. It's what it is. It's pivotal. I had needed to do that. And I feel like now, it's about articulating what we want as women. And I do influence not only women, but men too, but I primarily do spend most of my time coaching and mentoring women. I think just because there are fewer of us to do that in the business that I'm in too. And what I'm really deliberate about is helping women to not have to make excuses for asking for what they need and what they want. Simply ask. You don't need to have the justification. Now, there might be a business case for something. If you're looking for a raise, send in your bullets. These are my reasons why, etc. But not because of anything that's outside of that. And I think that we have to continually think about what would our male counterparts do in that situation?
Yeah.
Right? Not all of them, but it's a generalization. I recognize that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's, there are some key messages that I continue to share. And I feel like when I'm repeating them for the same or different women that I'm coaching, it's also a reminder to myself, right?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
teach what we need to learn.
Absolutely. You make me think of a book, and it's a little dated now, but it's called Good Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And she talks very much to that. Like we, and again, I'm not all I am woman, hear me roar here, but
Right,
like
exactly.
there are some, our world is built upon a white male culture, and I'm not knocking white men, like, but it's factual. And so looking at that, she's talking about like, you don't have to come in and justify why you're taking vacation. You just ask for the vacation.
Exactly.
You don't you don't have to share all the personal whys behind it. And that's where sometimes stepping into being more like a man is good for us. Right. And then there's also times when I remember being in a room where we were talking strategy, we're talking business planning, and it's sometimes about helping them step back and take a breath and kind of like be open to receiving what's coming in versus trying to be so like boxed into what it was that they're going to do. So if you were mentoring a young woman now, and it was interesting. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day about, I have a mentor who actually created the courses that I teach at Gonzaga, who's retired now, and he calls it the wise elder. And a friend of mine was like, why do you have to say elder? Right? Like, not that elder is bad, but like, you're not old. Don't, so maybe it's like wise woman, right? Like we're wise women and we're sharing wisdom. So if you had like a room full of women that were looking to you to say, share some like top like nuggets, mic drop nuggets that you have learned through your career, what would those be?
Well, first of all, I want to say too that I have had some amazing white male sponsors, including one currently. So I want to make an acknowledgement there, given that you brought that up, and I know that we're aligned in that thinking. So, and I think sponsorship is absolutely essential to grow women, and especially women and people in underestimated populations, right? So that would be a statement on that. And when I do have that opportunity to speak to women, I really like to help people think about what differentiates them. They might, a lot of times we come into a space, especially if you're younger or you're even newer in an organization and you're trying to feel your way through, to really identify what it is that makes you different. Because a lot of times we want to fit in, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to fit in, but there's also something very special about recognizing what makes you you and using that to your advantage and bringing that up, elevating that as your superpower. So I think that is definitely one of the key messages that I continually share with the women that I influence. I also think that establishing and being committed to clear boundaries is really important, especially when it comes to work-life balance, right? I mean, those probably are some of the most popular 3 words that we've heard, especially since the pandemic, work-life balance.
Yeah.
And having an unapologetic approach. Now, obviously, there are times when we are going to be putting in the extra time. There's going to be times when we are out of the office for whatever reason, and we know it's okay if somebody reaches out to us because there's something that is considered higher priority. But I think that always on mentality is degrading the quality of our life. While we're trying to make everybody else happy, we're sacrificing our own quality of life, right?
Yeah.
And I think too, let me think, for the third one, I think that it's also important to be curious and to ask questions, especially for people who are like myself, a non-technical person working in a very technical space. Again, leveraging that as a strength by saying, can you help me to understand what that means? Say more. The acronym ABC, always be curious, can be used in this case to really understand what makes someone tick, not only for ways of working with individuals, but also like in a space where I'm in marketing and I'm always getting the story, because the story is how we brand ourselves in the market, is you're not going to get the story if somebody's going to talk to you on a very technical level and you're not really understanding it. So you need to ask them to explain it to you in a way that will help you to understand. So continuing to ask those questions, because what you're doing in turn is you're teaching them how to talk to a different audience. So everybody wins in that situation. They're getting better at communicating what they do to somebody who's non-technical, which makes them more successful. And then we're able to convey the story in a meaningful way.
I love that. I love that, Alicia. And kind of a final question I have for you is, when you think about, like, I have a whole thing about the word boundaries, but when you think about boundaries, and I know we're in alignment with this, that really a boundary is knowing yourself well enough to know what you're okay with and what you're not okay with, and being able to articulate that. When you think about that, do you have any hacks or any like boundaries you've found that have helped you then be able to lead this lit up life that you have?
Well, it's always a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Boundaries are shifting, and different situations give us an opportunity to strengthen or test, or not test, but really like tap into where we're at with our boundaries in a given situation. And I think it's what you said earlier, where it's when you step back from the masculine, you move into the receiving and sit with, how does it really feel? How am I physically responding, right? That's that mind-body connection that often is referred to in yoga, mind, body, spirit. Like, how am I really feeling when I check in a given situation? And then that, I feel, for me, that is trusting my gut, right? And that is feeling how it's called feeling. So really feeling how it feels in the body.
Yeah. And your intuition, right? And listening to that intuition and trusting it. Because what I find is that we've learned how not to trust ourselves, not to trust that intuition, right? And it's somewhat cultural.
It is.
And then as you get into corporate, and I'm not knocking corporate, but it becomes another different type of cycle, right? So
it's a system, right? And I think navigating those systems and really understanding how you can influence a culture shift in those systems is critical. So having that real deep connection to oneself so that you can confidently influence and inspire a culture shift is right there. What you said, that's how you influence those systems.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Alicia, thank you so much for being here today. And if someone wanted to follow you, I know you do a lot of activity and share a lot of articles that are really deep and have some good meat to them. Where would they follow you?
Well, I am a total corporate LinkedIn person, so they can find me on LinkedIn at this point. That would be where, at Alicia Darrow.
Perfect. And Darrow, for those of you that are not watching on YouTube, is Darrow, and Alicia is Alicia. And go check her out on LinkedIn because you do share some great material out there. So I so appreciate you being here today and sharing about your life and what you have learned. And with that, folks, it's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to get in touch with me, and as Alicia was saying, getting really clear on what your desires are is really important. And that's kind of my jam. That's what I do. So please go out to my website. You can find that in the notes in the iTunes or wherever this is found. You can find it in the show notes. And please sign up for a clarity call with me. I can promise you, you'll be clearer after that 30 minutes than you were when we started. And with that, everyone have a fabulous week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. The song Ride is co-written and sung by Miss Jackie Wilson and her collaborators Tyler Banks, David DJ Lee, and Chris Renee. And a huge shout out to them for allowing us to use this perfect song. Everyone have a fabulous week, and I'll talk to you next week.